Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. Let me extend to all attendees, WTO members, WTO observers, and external participants a warm welcome to this launch of the World Trade Report 2020. This year's report focuses on government policies to promote innovation in the digital age. The program of today's launch will be as follows. Deputy Director General Yi will make opening remarks, to be followed by a brief presentation of the report by the report coordinators, Mr. Ma Kabwan and Ms. Ang Kai-ju. At the end of this presentation, I will then moderate a panel discussion with a very distinguished and high-level set of speakers, which I will introduce at that time. During today's proceedings, participants connected by Zoom, including journalists, should use the Q&A or questions and answers function of the platform for their questions and remarks to be considered. After the panel discussion, we will do our best to answer some of these questions, time permitting, of course. If we do not manage or only manage partially to answer your questions, we can always be contacted bilaterally for further follow-up after this launch. Deputy Director General Yi, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Bob. Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome WTO members and external participants who gathered today for the launch of the World Trade Report 2020. This flagship publication of the WTO is prepared by the Economic Research and Statistics Division with input and cooperation of other divisions in the Secretariat. Each year, the WTO World Trade Report examines a policy topic relevant to the WTO from an economic angle. This year's topic could not be more relevant. We have chosen to discuss government policies to promote innovation in the digital age. In this digital age, a growing number of countries have adopted policies aimed at boosting growth through innovation and technological upgrading. The domestic economic challenges linked to the COVID-19 pandemic are certainly leading countries to strengthen these policies. This year's World Trade Report looks at these trends and at how the WTO fits in. Project leaders Mark Aubon and Ang Kai-ju will present the main highlights of the report in a moment, to be followed by a panel of distinguished speakers, moderated by WTO's chief economist and the director of economic research and statistics, Bob Koopman. I would like to greet them here. Before Mark and Ang Kai do so, I would like to outline a couple of points of the report, which are important from an institutional perspective. First, the focus on innovation and the digital economy is one of the defining features of government policies today. Historically, governments have often sought to use policy to enhance long-term economic growth and societal welfare. Policies aim to support a multiple set of objectives, including achieving a balance between managing change in mature industries while promoting emerging industries and technologies. In the past decades, these policies have increasingly been outward-oriented in recognition that openness, access to larger markets, and increased competition lead companies to innovate. Thus, trade and trade policies have contributed to innovation. The certainty and predictability in global market conditions fostered by the multilateral trading system has made an important contribution to technology diffusion globally. particularly through global value chains. The report notes that innovation, productivity, and other key objectives of government policies are best served by broadly open markets. In very recent years, spurring innovation in the digital field, whether new in the world or new in the country, is at the core of many new government policies, which have been adopted in countries at all levels of development. Governments do not want to miss the transition to the digital economy, and many of them have adopted proactive frameworks to promote digital development and innovation, with a view, for example, to catching up on infrastructure, developing the digitization of production, and building capacity for a local software app economy. Relying on open source technology, innovation in the digital field is widely sought at all levels of development. The second point I would like to make is that the digital field, the WTO, and its existing rulebook already support innovation directly and indirectly in several ways. Directly, by eliminating tariffs on internet and telecommunications infrastructure products through the Information Technology Agreement and extending these benefits to non-ITA members. By liberalizing internet services through the Telecommunications Agreement, and by stimulating e-commerce with the moratorium on duties on cross-border digital flows, as well as providing a robust and stable framework for the development of global and open standards, intellectual property protection, and other critical rules based on the principles of non-discrimination, transparency, and reciprocity. The WTO has also supported innovation indirectly through the improved resources allocation and efficiency. That comes with open trade, which frees up resources that can be devoted to new cutting-edge pursuits. The WTO agreements reached a quarter century ago proved to be remarkably forward-looking in providing a broad framework that helped foster an information and communication-enabled economy across all levels of development, while preserving the policy space for countries to pursue different models of digital development. Just as the WTO fostered broadly open, predictable, and competitive markets in the wider global economy, it can in the future play an important role in reducing uncertainty in markets for digital goods and services. But this will require updating the WTO framework to address new challenges and demands. International cooperation would be useful to foster innovation and interoperability and reduce tension in ways that would make international markets function more predictably. The report looks at how such international cooperation can address these challenges and maximize the positive spillovers from government policies while limiting negative ones. Mark and Ankai will elaborate in a minute about what the report says on the points I just made. I thank you for your attention and congratulate again the Economic Research and the Statistics team of the WTO for having produced this useful thought piece. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your remarks, TDGE, and your support for our work is always appreciated. Let me now turn to Mark and Ankai for the presentation of the report. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bob, and thank you very much for DDGE. Ankai and myself will be making a presentation of the main points of the report, and we would like to say also that the report is a teamwork and that have involved a lot of people from the Economic Research Division and Statistics Division, as well as other divisions of the WTO. So thanks to all, and we will be promoting this report as a team endeavor. Now, the starting point of this report has been certainly an observation that there has been a resurgence of government policies and government intervention in the economy for quite some while. Government intervention is back in style, if you allow me this formula. In the decade since the global financial crisis, government intervention in the economy has come back into fashion. Some, and at least 115 countries have articulated so-called new industrial policies or Industry 4.0 or digital transformation plans. Whatever the names of these policy or the way they are being packaged, frameworks are being developed in a way that is clearly providing for a focus on digital upgrading, digitalization of production, and support to this digitalization of production and innovation. While such policies or waves in policies have always offered a mix of support to mature industries and rising sectors, the overriding theme of this wave is definitely at all levels of developments to support the drive towards the digital transition and the support to innovation. Now, we've been asking ourselves three kinds of questions in the reports. What has changed in the economics of the digital economy that may have had an impact on the design and the tool making of policies? Hence, what are the policy implications of these changes at the national level? And the third question is, what is the role of trade and trade policy and how the WTO fits in? So let me just give you an overview of what our answers to these questions are. What has changed with the digital economy? Well, there are special features to this digital economy that leads to some rethinking of economic policy making. For example, the importance of data, the integration of services and goods, something that we have looked in previous reports, so the servicification of goods, the scalability of firms, the fact that there are general purpose technology that are being invented there and on which local software and application industries can be developed, that there are also network effects. We will explain this in a minute. The government toolkit and the policy implication that includes some new tools that certainly reflect these characteristics that I've just been describing: the central role of data, the integration of goods and services, the high scalability of firms, the existence of these general purpose technologies. And these new tools are going in four directions. First, they aim at encouraging innovation and knowledge sharing. So you have here a mix of so-called horizontal support for research and development, support to entrepreneurship and startups, tech hubs, which are very popular these days, talent attraction and skill development, and intellectual property protection. With policies, combined with policies to incentivize or facilitate foreign direct investment as well, which remains very important in the toolkits of governments, and as well as government procurement programs to foster innovations. That's one piece, the focus on innovation and knowledge sharing policies. The second is, of course, given the importance of data, developing data policies and regulation. that is very important. That's the novelty of the government toolkit. Supporting the development of enabling infrastructure is also very prominent, particularly in developing countries. For example, the acquisition of telecom and internet infrastructure of the latest generation, and of course the access to this infrastructure is very important. In particular, some issues about access to the network and being able to import the right equipment. And finally, one thing that is increasingly important for government is addressing some of the winner-take-all dynamics that may appear in this new economy, and also employment concerns arising from rapid digital transition, not only in the digital field, but all in the field, economic fields where the digitalization of production has an impact on jobs and on retraining. What is the role of trade policy and the WTO? Well, we find that as much as we found that in other sectors, open trade policy tend to contribute to innovation through increased competition. There's some good research showing, actually recent research showing that in frontier countries, what we call frontier countries, that is countries that are at the frontier of innovation, increased foreign competition leads domestic firms to escape competition by innovating. Access to foreign markets also is providing an incentive to innovate and participation in global value chains. We're asking ourselves what the role of the WTO is, and as DDG said, we found that the WTO rulebook and commitments have provided a significant contribution to the expansion of the digital economy and the digitization of production up to now. That is through several agreements that may have been a bit underlooked at the very onset, like the ITA or the moratorium on e-commerce, or the liberalization of internet and telecommunication services. They all have contributed to the development of the digital industry, as much as open standards, transparent and non-discriminatory standards that have certainly led the way to the expansion of global internet standards. Now, many national policies that are being developed today are already covered one way or another in WTO rules. Now, looking ahead, the question is, what else do we need in the rule book? And here we are raising questions more than we answer them in the report. Of course, there are increasing demands for international rules on data transfer, localization, consumer protection and national security. This is something that is currently being discussed in the e-commerce negotiation. Would more liberalization in digital trade create more innovation? What kind of flexibilities are needed in the WTO rulebooks? We will see. There's a lot of emphasis on R&D subsidies, on innovation-based government procurement, and do we need more international dialogue and cooperation on competition policies, which is not something that is currently entirely covered by the WTO, but these are the questions we are asking at the end of the report. So in order to get a bit more into the details of these three areas of examination, I pass on the floor to Ankai to discuss the first one.
Thank you very much, Mark. As Mark has mentioned, this report takes a forward-looking perspective. It specifically highlights several special features of the digital economy which have led some governments to rethink about their policy. First, data has become a key input in the digital economy. Some people would like to refer to data as the new oil in the economy because data feed into pretty much every economic activity. However, this notion is not very precise because unlike oil, data are also non-rivalrous in the sense that if I downloaded a song from the internet, it does not prevent the next person from downloading the same song from the internet. Because of this non-rivalrous nature of data, data has become ubiquitous in pretty much every aspect of our life today, and the amount of data the internet carried has grown exponentially in the past several decades. Secondly, Many digital technologies, such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and blockchain, have been considered as general purpose technologies. Because they're widely used throughout the economy, they benefit societies at large. Because their quality improves over time while their costs go down, and because they can generate innovation. Just as the invention of steam engines, electricity, and computers have triggered the first, second, and third industrial revolutions, digital technologies are believed to bring about the fourth industrial revolution. A third feature about the digital economy is the fact that goods and services are increasingly integrated. Think about the value of many manufacturing products, such as a smartphone or a car. Although you can feel them as a tangible good, but most of the value of these products actually come from research, design, and after-sales service that are embedded in these products. Another important feature in the digital economy is the fact that many companies can scale up very rapidly. That is because digital companies no longer rely on heavy physical investment, but rather they rely on intangible assets. Now imagine if you are going to set up a new digital company, the initial investment involves research and development, setting up facilities, and hiring employees. But the cost of producing one additional unit of digital products are almost zero. This means that a firm can scale up and reach international markets without owning foreign assets once it reaches a critical scale. This can also lead to winner-takes-all dynamics in the digital economy. In addition, the digital economy features network effect. The fact that the value of a network grows as more users join the network. Imagine users who purchase a phone with a pre-installed operating system could benefit from other users who also use the same operation system. Because the more users there are, the more likely applications will be developed based on this system. By the same token, if a government sets a standard, the latecomers are also likely to use the same standard, and this could set the path for the development of future technologies. Finally, all these changes are happening at unprecedented paces, which requires policymakers to stay flexible, develop and adapt their policies that are fit for purpose in the digital economy. I would like to go a bit into depth and look at two special features that we just discussed. This figure shows the top patent applications in the field of artificial intelligence. The vertical axis shows the name of companies that have filed patent applications in the field of AI, while the horizontal axis shows the areas where these patents are used for. AI can be used in a wide range of areas, from agriculture to document management, from personal devices to transportation. Most recently, doctors have also been using AI to diagnose COVID-19 cases and discover effective treatment in tackling COVID-19. And this figure shows the manufacturing output per worker and the share of manufacturing employment in 3 advanced economies: the United States, Japan, and Germany. Technologies such as automation or industrial robotics have increased the productivity of workers. At the same time, however, this also means that the share of employment in the manufacturing sectors have declined steadily in the past several decades. It poses challenges for government policies as well. With that, I give the floor to Mark.
Thanks, Ankai. Well, we've seen the characteristics of the digital economy, importance of data, scalability, and so on. But what does it mean for policy design, policy tools? Let's take a few examples. Importance of data. Well, obviously, data availability policies matter. Now, free flow data or not free flow data, what are the characteristics that needs to be followed in terms of localization, in terms of privacy, in terms of, that's what governments very much are considering or have already considered, because a lot of them have already a substantial framework. The other thing is, obviously, a data-driven economic model is less physical capital intensive. Less upfront capital is needed in building a new sector, which of course has an impact on the design of government support and interventions relative to other sectors that may be more capital intensive. And as being said, we are talking about more intangible and immaterial kind of value added. Therefore, we are in a model that promotes science, education intensity, IP rights, intellectual property rights, and knowledge diffusion. The central question of a lot of policy is how to generate innovation, how to support innovation. And of course here, perhaps a distinction needs to be made between those countries which are at the frontier of innovation in the digital field that would be supporting innovation as being new in the world, or supporting new innovation as being new in the country. That is not only importing some of the knowledge and sharing some of the knowledge that is already there, but also using this knowledge as a platform to being able to develop a number of activities, being be it a domestic digital app, services, or participation in providing digital services internationally. That is to make your own space into the new digital supply chain information. Now, what you see here is a lot of focus on research and development. As horizontal support, there can be, of course, more targeted research and development policies. For example, what we call mission-based R&D. That is, you try to achieve a particular aim that has been, for example, trying to reach vaccines, or previously developing an industry for batteries that we have seen in some regions of the world, or previously supercomputers in the 1980s, or even in the 60s. So that's not new. And Professor Mazzucato may say a word about it, sending a man on the moon in the 1960s. Now, while the focus has been very much and remains very much, as we see in the report, on the development of outward-oriented policies and special economic zones, special economic zones are turning gradually, or are being complemented by so-called tech hubs. I think a lot of countries are interested in replicating the kind of agglomeration effects that certain successful regions, tech regions, have managed to develop, and therefore the use of tech hubs that would bring together universities, software developers, hardware developers, and other talents is something that is being expanded, as well as in general support to startup and entrepreneurship. Now, we've been talking about open source technology or general purpose technology. A lot of countries see opportunities in developing their own software industry on the basis of this sort of large platform on which they can eventually build. And I think another focus is on importing knowledge, hence the remaining importance of FDI. We've been looking at FDI in the digital field, and we still see a lot of focus and a lot of interest in providing incentives as well as investment facilitation to bring in the best of talents in that field. Now, digital economy requires access to the network. I think that seems to be the basic, but it doesn't have to be at all level of development the latest 5G or 4G. We have seen the development in Africa, for example, of mobile banking with 2 and 3G, but the existence of a reliable access to the network, cheap access also to equipment that is available in the market is allowing potentially all countries to develop a low local app industry. There are flip sides of globalization of production. Of course, the quicker the changes, the more the need to retrain workers and have them adapt, including in the manufacturing area with the digitization of production. Digitization of machinery now exists in Bangladesh, in the textile area. It provides threats, it provides opportunities, it also provides threats, and this is an element that every country has to factor in its own policy making. Finally, scalability. My colleagues have been talking about the winner takes all effects and possible national negative spillovers of national policies. We've been mapping a little bit policy instruments that are being developed as a result of the new policies that we are describing and that we are listing. And as you could see from my presentation, there's a mix of known tools that are being adapted to the digital economy, as well as new tools. Among the known tools, well, a lot of research and development support to promote innovation. Perhaps, Ankai, can you show the slide? We see government funding and support. So government funding would be government R&D expenditure as much as government R&D tax incentives being present at all levels of development. And you see that the share of it relative to capital support by the business sector, R&D support by the business sector, the share of government sector seems to be smaller in the high income countries because the mobilization and the presence of private sector capital is more obvious, and with financial sector that are able to mobilize savings around this, while the share of the government seems to be more important in countries at lower level of development that may neither have venture capital or that where the banking sector may be a bit more conservative in supporting startup. Therefore, the share of government, although high income countries in dollar terms continue to support more, of course, government R&D, the share of that support by the government is higher as a share of the total in the lower income countries. Now, tariff liberalization supporting digitization and the ICT in the sector expansion matter very much. And we've seen that since the inception of the Information Technology Agreement, there has been a quadrupling of trade in the ITA product area, which now represent 10% of world trade. Now, investment remain always organized in combination with these policy, and a central piece of government policies, government incentive, as I said, for investment in the digital field as much as investment facilitation. Finally, as we said at the beginning, in each wave of industrial policy making, there is a duality between supporting the expansion of new sectors and at the same time protecting those mature industries where modernization is supposed to take place. Now we're looking at the use of industrial policy tools, and we find that they remain, for the protective ones, the most concentrated in I would say the most competitive and mature ones, like metals and chemicals and other fairly mature industries of that kind. Now, I would like to show a few more slides as we move along with respect to new and old instruments that are being used. Data regulations have been widely used. As you can see, since the early 2000s, the number of data laws and regulations affecting cross-border data have been increasing a lot. We are seeing also substantial use of tech hubs, right? And so here, the number of clusters established in 27 innovation economies has been increasing quite sharply. And I will skip a few other slides in the interest of time before we actually move to the role of trade and trade policy and the role of the WTO.
Thank you very much, Mark. A lot of the aspects has already been highlighted. And this report recognized that openness to trade can foster innovation. Especially through openness, companies can access imports of capital goods and intermediate inputs, which increases their productivity and allow them to join the global value chains. The face-to-face interaction that comes with the participation in global value chains and research networks are particularly beneficial for developing countries to access and adopt new technologies. At the same time, innovative companies can also benefit from access to large foreign markets, since a larger market will make it more profitable for these companies to invest in research and development. Their empirical evidence shows that, on balance, import competition can also increase innovation, since they give more incentives for domestic companies to innovate in order to stay ahead of their competitors. Other policy tools can also be conducive to innovation. For example, governments have played a role in funding innovation through research grants, tax incentives for business research and development, or government procurement programs. At the same time, the importance of intellectual property rights regulations are bound to increase in the digital age, precisely because it's pretty much costless to produce one additional unit of digital products. We need to rethink about intellectual property rights in the digital field. At the same time, because companies rely less on physical assets, but more on intangible assets, the value of education becomes more and more important, especially education in science, engineering, mathematics, as well as open immigration policy to attract the best human capital into to join the domestic economy and endeavor for innovation. Policies to increase competition can also benefit innovation, since that will encourage more firms to innovate. And other complementary policies could include investment in telecommunications infrastructure, technological clusters, or innovation hubs, etc. While we recognize that countries have adopted more and more innovation policies, this report also notes that some of these policies could have cross-border effects. In particular, the report recognized several mechanisms through which one country's innovation policy could have international ramifications. First is what we call knowledge spillovers. That is, the innovation policy in one country can help build a stock of knowledge and would allow other countries to stand on the shoulder of giants and invent more. So the knowledge spillover tends to bring positive benefits to the whole world. Second, some government policies could also have strategic consequences. This is particularly relevant when a few dominant players would operate in the entire global market. In this case, if one government supports its domestic companies, it's likely to divert the profits from other companies in other countries to its domestic company. That it could also create some international consequences. A third mechanism comes from inter-industry linkages. This is particularly true when upstream industries would provide crucial inputs to downstream industries. In this case, if a government supports the upstream industries, the benefit could accrue to downstream industries, both domestically and in foreign countries. Other policies could also have international consequences. For example, if governments compete for foreign direct investment, it could result in competition for scarce resources, or some policies could have supply or demand effects by affecting international prices. So Mark will talk more about the international cooperation here.
We've been looking at international cooperation in the past and looking ahead with some questions. well, looking back 25 years, because we're celebrating our 25th anniversary, well, the WTO rulebook has proved to be relatively forward-looking with regard to the digital economy. The Information Technology Agreement lowered the cost of access to mobile telephony and internet telecom infrastructure. The 1996 Telecommunications Services Reference Paper set out regulatory principles for the sector that are binding on 82 members that I have signed it. Core WTO rules for technical standards provided for openness, transparency, and non-discrimination, principle consistent with the development of global internet and related standards. Subsidy disciplines set out space for governments to provide financial backing for innovation, while setting out shared rules for such support. And the TRIPS agreement established baseline protection for intellectual property, encouraging trade and investment in cutting-edge sector, while the e-commerce moratorium saw members refrain from placing duties on cross-border electronic transmissions. Many national policies, such as tariffs, technical standards, and certain types of government support are already covered by WTO rules. Now, the WTO is not the only player in this field, and there are various forms of cooperation that we're looking at in the reports. And increasingly, on very new bilateral free trade agreement, you can find now digital chapters. We are looking also at some regional agreement, as well as other international organizations like the International Telecommunication Unions, which do have rules in this field. Now, looking ahead, the question is whether and what further international cooperation could help make governments' national innovation policies more likely to succeed at their stated goals. There are increasing demands on international rules on data transfer, localization, consumer protection, and national security, some of which are discussed in the ongoing e-commerce negotiations among a group of WTO members. Is there a case for more liberalization of digital trade, including digital services? What kind of new flexibilities do we need, such as research and development subsidies or for innovation-based government procurement? Is there a need for cross-border dialogue on competition policies? One thing is clear, as governments in economies, big and small, try to drive technological upgrading and digital innovation, policies will have cross-border spillover effects, many positive, some negative. International cooperation to foster shared understanding about these policies would help forestall trade tension and thus lay a firmer foundation for innovation, investment, and cross-border business to flourish. With this, we'd like to stop our presentation, hoping that we've said enough for you to go into the report and read it fully. From here, I leave the floor to Bob for the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark and Ankai, for that excellent presentation. I do encourage everyone watching to go to our website and download the report when it's available. And hopefully sometime in the next few weeks, we'll be providing a smaller but deeper presentation on the details of the report, particularly for WTO delegates who might be interested. Now, I would very much like to introduce our panel speakers today. I have the pleasure of welcoming Ms. Lo Yen Ling, Minister of State, Ministry of Trade and Industry of Singapore. Welcome, Minister Lo. Thank you for joining us. Professor Mariana Mazzucato, professor at University College London and the author of The Entrepreneurial State and the Value of Everything. Welcome, Professor Mazzucato. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Deborah Revoltella, Director of Economics Department of the European Investment Bank, who has led a number of studies on innovation in Europe. We very much look forward to her intervention. And finally, Dr. Harsha Vardhana Singh, former WTO Deputy Director General, and somebody who's contributed a lot of thinking to this area through the E15 initiative and other interventions. So I'm going to ask for each of our panelists to make a short introduction on their topic. We'll go in order of my introduction. So let me first start with Minister Loh. Minister, one sees that your country has developed domestic policies to make Singapore a digital innovator. Since the report speaks about positive spillovers of innovation in the digital sector, we'd very much appreciate your views on innovation policies in Singapore. Also, as co-convener along with Australia and Japan of the WTO Joint Statement Initiative on Electronic Commerce, which was launched in December of 2017, and as of July 2020 had 85 members who had confirmed their intention to commence WTO negotiations on trade-related aspects of e-commerce. We'd very much appreciate hearing your views on the innovation policies in Singapore. Minister Loh, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Robert Goodman. First, I would like to begin by thanking the WTO Secretariat for inviting me at today's event to launch the World Trade Report 2020. Thank you so much. I also want to use the opportunity to congratulate the WTO Secretariat for rolling out this year's World Trade Report, which I have sat through the presentation. Thank you to all the speakers. And I feel that the World Trade Report really offers a glimpse of the road ahead for global trade. And this is especially pertinent amid the disruptions caused by COVID-19. The report examines the role of innovation and technology policies in today's increasingly digitalized world economy. It also highlights the evolving role of the WTO in the face of rapid digital transformation. It is very critical that WTO, which Singapore we all views as paramount, continues to evolve and remain relevant. I want to also use this occasion to thank my fellow panelists. I look forward to the panel discussion. I want to share that trade is the lifeblood of Singapore. Trade is the lifeblood of our country, and we are strong supporters of the rule-based multilateral trading system as embodied in the WTO. We recognize the growing importance of digitalization in Singapore, and we have embraced the need to continually innovate, which is the constant word that you hear in as the speakers introduce the World Trade Report. And COVID-19 in the last 9 months have showed us that it has accelerated the pace of digitalization and innovation around the world. In fact, COVID-19 has accelerated the structural changes, and Singapore and many other countries have been tapping on technology to fight the pandemic and economic disruptions, from implementing safe distancing to work from home. The fact that it is the first time that we are participating in WTO's platform virtually tells us how much the world has changed, and also ramping up e-commerce, supporting our SMEs to embrace digital commerce. The pandemic, coupled with rapid digitalization, is really changing the way that we all live, work, and play. I'm very glad that the Digital Trade Report touched a lot about digital trade, because digital trade has played a crucial role in facilitating the flow of goods and services within and between economic borders during the pandemic, and will certainly continue to play an important role in the near future, even after we develop the vaccine. I think it is here to stay. So therefore, it is crucial and critical for WTO to evolve and adapt to these changes, like what the speakers have shared earlier, and also to set rules to adequately support and address trade in the digital age. Mr. Robert Goodman asked about Singapore's role in terms of the JSI. When Singapore joined Australia and Japan in 2017, 3 years ago, to co-convene the joint statement initiatives on e-commerce, back then, we did this because we sought to establish multilateral trade rules for the new digital economy. We did not predict 3 years later, COVID-19 will happen. And to date, 86 members of the WTO have signed up for the JSI. And 86 members means more than half of the WTO's membership. Looking ahead, we need to leverage and better realize the potential that digitalization can bring to all our economies and to spur our global recovery. We need greater digital integration, not fragmentation, and certainly not protectionism. Robert, if you allow me 1 more minute to quickly touch on digitalization and innovation, which you asked me in the last part of the question. Allow me to update the friends from all over the world. In the last 10 months, all of us in Singapore have also been disrupted like our friends in other parts of the world. In Singapore, many workplaces, schools, government services have shifted online, and many service transactions and information have also gone online. In fact, now our people go about their daily routines with greater reliance on digital platforms. And all this have been possible because of the presence of high-speed broadband networks and widespread internet penetration. I've just checked our number, 98% of the household in Singapore have internet access. So fortunately, due to the high internet penetration, we're quite well placed to work from home. We're quite well placed to implement home-based learning. Our move in the last few years to invest in digital infrastructure and also engineering capabilities have enabled us to tap on technology to implement the various innovative digital solutions to manage COVID-19 pandemic more effectively. Very quick example, I think we all know in managing COVID, contact tracing, isolation is really key. So we were able to roll out what we call the Trace Together program for contact tracing and infection control. What does it entail? It entails just a mobile phone. Every one of us have a mobile phone. So all we need to do when we go to the supermarket is just to take a few seconds to scan the QR code or to carry a very small token that looks like an AirPod holder. So it just comprises a mobile application and a portable device that will be used to track down and ring fence COVID-19 cases. Sorry, I'm using such phrases like track down and ring fence, but all these are quite critical in infection control and contact tracing. And we have also launched an online safe entry system that logs the detail as well as the entry and exit records of people visiting popular venue. And all this has helped us to reduce the time needed to identify and quarantine a close contact from 4 days to less than 2 days. But we still have much to learn and much to do. So we're very happy to be able to participate in today's panel discussions to learn from my fellow panelists as well. Over to you, Robert. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very interesting presentation and update, Minister Loh. We'll come back to you with some questions, I'm sure. Professor Matsukato, you contributed an opinion piece in this year's World Trade Report, for which we thank you very much. You've published widely and been a vocal advocate for mission-oriented policies and a positive role for the state in driving aspects of innovation. You've argued that one should focus less on economic sectors and more on trying to solve problems that matter to all. Can you tell us about this and how such an approach can benefit countries of all levels of development? The floor is yours.
Sure. Well, thanks so much. And I hope you hear me, but there's building work going on inside my house. So I'll try to speak loudly when you can't hear me. So first of all, I think the reason this whole conversation is interesting around this mission-oriented approach is it upsets the usual dichotomy that we think about in terms of kind of horizontal versus vertical policies, which the report, I think, builds on really nicely. It kind of distinguishes those kind of policies. And I think that what missions do is they redefine what we even mean by vertical, right? So instead of choosing sectors, the idea is, we really should be choosing problems. And in fact, since 2015, the globe, countries around the globe have actually chosen big problems that we have to be solving together, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, but we don't necessarily have an investment trajectory and pathway to reach them. So the question is, how can we redesign industrial policy, development policy, innovation policy, procurement policy to be much more problem focused? And starting with the Sustainable Development Goals, really transform them into concrete missions, so problems that need to be solved, like going from, say, the climate change challenge to a carbon neutrality at the level of a city, and then ask, what does it mean for how we bring all sorts of different sectors together to innovate, to collaborate, to invest in new ways? So additionality, making things happen that wouldn't have happened anyway, but to really structure those new collaborations within the redesign of industrial strategy itself. And, you mentioned before the moon landing. The reason the moon landing is interesting is actually, unlike what many people think, it wasn't just NASA, it wasn't just aeronautics. There was a huge amount of investment and innovation that occurred in multiple sectors, from nutrition, materials, electronics. The entire software sector actually came out as a spillover of trying to get to the moon and back in a generation. And that mission was very concrete. It's what I just said, get to the moon and back in one generation. It wasn't just beat the Russians or Sputnik or the space race. But then what was required, as I just mentioned, was all that, those different sectors innovating, but it didn't just happen, out of the blue on its own. It actually required government to design its policies, like procurement, to really crowd in, bottom up, that innovation across all those different sectors, including the actual procurement contracts. I'm actually writing a book about this that'll be out in January, were designed in such a way also to make sure that the partnership, right, this word that we often use, public-private partnership, was truly a symbiotic one, right? It wasn't just, let's, introduce commercialization opportunities in space and make it a thing in and of itself, as though getting the private sector in space is an objective. It was actually, hey, we have to solve these problems together, and we need to design the contracts so that the incentives are there to actually deliver high quality but also efficient mechanisms. And they thought a lot about what that meant. So, redesigning today grants, loans, prize schemes, procurement, to really, again, be problem focused, to crowd in those bottom up solutions, is probably the key point of this approach. But when we think about the role of government, which your opening was about, government is back with a bang. Government actually has been back for many different crises, whether it's the climate crisis where governments are reacting, but also the financial crisis. What often is missing, though, is that kind of directional push, and also at the level of the public organizations, thinking through their own organizational culture in such a way that explicitly talks about directionality. So words like leveling the playing field, doesn't really work. What we're all talking about, if we're talking about the SDGs and solving the biggest challenges we have around health and climate, is tilting the playing field so that we are together moving towards a solution to a big problem. That really means redesigning all sorts of the incentives so that they reward those behaviors that are bringing us closer to that solution. So designing a tax system, for example, that actually rewards long-termism over short-termism, or that taxes materials more than it does labor, will help us steer the economy towards a green transition. And yet we've been kind of stuck in these words like setting the rules of the game and leveling the playing field, without admitting that actually what we need is to tilt it, but not to tilt it in such a way that just picks winners, right? Picking one firm, one sector, one technology, but explicitly picks a direction and then redesigns those instruments to kind of steer us there. And mission-oriented organizations in the public sector, unfortunately, are all too rare. And that really does require capacity and capabilities within public institutions that are as ambitious as those that we often, much more honestly admit are required in the private sector. That's why you have great masters in business administrations around the world, helping managers think through organizational behavior, strategic management, decision sciences, these really kind of bold, ways to train managers to think out of the box and welcome uncertainty. We need the same kind of level of ambition inside public institutions, and that does require going away from some status quo thinking of, the public sector is just required to fix market failures. Really what the mission-oriented approach is about is a different approach, not fixing markets, but co-creating markets, public and private, and co-shaping markets. And that then feeds into how, policies like those that you mentioned, that the different speakers mentioned on intellectual property rights, would be framed. It's less about incentives and much more about how do you govern a market in such a way that actually helps you achieve an objective. And so, intellectual property rights are often too wide, they're too strong, they're too upstream, leading to what William Baumol called unproductive entrepreneurship. So how do we govern the patent system in such a way also that there's a more symbiotic public-private relationship, given that the patent is actually a 20-year monopoly given to the private sector from the public sector. There should be more of a symbiotic deal. And lastly, I'll end on this. That question of deal, I think, is really important, because we use words like the Green Deal, and we kind of know what needs to happen on the green side, but the deal really requires bringing this notion of stakeholder value and purpose to the center of public-private partnerships. And there's no better place to look, for that around, say, the intellectual property rights, which I just mentioned, around, say, the vaccine for COVID-19. We need to do what the World Health Organization has argued for, which is to make sure we're pooling those patents in order to really drive collective intelligence if we want this vaccine to be globally accessible and reproducible. But also, it's been interesting how some countries like France have been quite explicit during the COVID-19 moment that the point of government is not just subsidies, bailouts, guarantees. So it's not just there to hand out help to the private sector, but really to help the private sector and the public sector to transform towards our goals. So the bailouts that actually went in France to Renault and Air France were conditional on those companies actually reducing their carbon footprint. We didn't do that in the UK. We gave a big bailout package to EasyJet, but also in Denmark, coming back to this issue of tilting the playing field, they said that those companies using tax havens won't easily access these recovery funds. So this issue of conditionality shouldn't be seen as a penalty, but as a kind of sincere and concrete way to build stakeholder value into the public-private partnerships, which are embedded in any grant, loan, or procurement contract. And I think that is really central to the mission-oriented approach, because it's all about bringing a common mission, a common goal and purpose to the center of how we do industrial strategy and innovation policy, and really to have an outcomes-based approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. And as somebody who is working at a public organization, I do think it's very important for us also to think about ways to be more innovative and find opportunities to create an environment that helps our members take things ahead. I remember, just briefly, I worked for 30 years in the US government as a senior executive, and under, I think it was Vice President Gore, reinventing government, all of our executive core qualifications changed, which I found very interesting, having come from a family business. It embraced entrepreneurship, business acumen, and risk-taking. And as a bureaucrat, I found that very, very welcoming, but not all of my colleagues did at the time. So you talked about, sort of governance versus incentives. I like that. And I think we'll have to come back to that in a few minutes. I'd now like to turn to Dr. Deborah Revoltella. Deborah, in recent years, your European Investment Bank research has focused on the drivers of innovation systems in Europe. And earlier this year, you published evidence from an EIB investment survey about the adoption of digital technology by firms across Europe and the United States. Could you share with us some of the conclusions of this survey and other research that you've done? Deborah, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Robert. And I'm really thrilled to join this debate. And there is no better time to reflect on global policies to deal with innovation in the digital age like today. And the reason is that the race for a COVID vaccine and the need to very fast advancement in innovation in climate, which is necessary to achieve the net zero carbon emissions by 2050, spur substantial policy support worldwide and call for much better common understanding and more coordination of those policies to maximize positive spillover. At stake is the fast and fair deployment of the COVID vaccine throughout the world, and having a chance to counter the climate crisis, accelerating the needed climate innovation and the deployment of new technologies. And this is exactly what your report is aiming for, and I'm really thrilled to have an opportunity to discuss it. Robert, you were asking me about the work on digitalization that we presented in our investment report at the beginning of the year. We quite clearly highlighted a number of challenges, mostly focusing at Europe. Looking at the top 2,500 global spender in R&D, European firms emerge in our study as kind of losing their status. Europe confirms global leadership in innovation in automotive sector and in the pharma sector, but is failing to create a new global leaders defined as firms entering into the list of top global spender in R&D. And Europe is less capable in engaging in leadership, in specialization in software and computer science, something where US and Chinese companies have clearly succeeded lately. And the challenge is clear, specifically because of digitalization and the fact that digitalization is such a pervasive effect and transformational effect on all sides of the economy, including the non-digital born sectors. In our survey, we also find out that there is an issue in terms of adoption of digital technologies. And what we see is that 37% of EU firms are today still non-digital, for sure, compared to 27% in the US. And what is particularly lacking in Europe is the penetration of the Internet of Things, which is, again, such a pervasive technologies affecting all the non-digital born sectors. And there are various issues related to that. Partly is the firm size, partly is the market fragmentation that we still see, lack of skills. There is a strong effort on the public sector to provide the necessary infrastructure behind. And lately at the European policy level, a long discussion has started in terms of data protection, not only to support, not only and there Europe has been quite fast on protecting individuals, but also for managing the usage of data in the Internet of Things and more as a support of the digital innovation. And then how to deal with competition issues, where on the one side, Europe is debating tax issues, the rule of dominant players, but also mitigating market distortions, the issues of public procurement and cybersecurity issues. In the EU, delay in the transformation of the non-digital born leaders may have also delayed the more radical shift. And the key backlog that we have seen on the one side is gaps in terms of skills that have called for more policies toward the skills that are still lacking in an integrated way at the European level. But also the lack of this innovation network or innovation environment and the pulling factor from past success stories, other than the innovation finance, where a lot we have seen coming back lately. But this is what comes out from our last report. I wanted to take the opportunity for launching a somehow more positive message on Europe and an opportunity for more cooperation going forward at the global level that is related to new studies that we are conducting, and actually we will present next January in our new report. And the main topic is on this specific part of the innovation that is related to the green and smart transition, so the intersection between digital and green. In this area, a lot of innovation is needed, and a lot of innovation is needed if we want to achieve the climate target and aim to counter the climate crisis. And more international cooperation is needed in this direction. In this specific area, we see that Europe is doing quite well at the global level, actually is at the lead in terms of patenting compared to other regions in the intersection between the green and digital patents. EU patents are quite influential, they are quite well seated international, and there is quite a not only strong citation, but Europe also relies more on patents, sides patents from others. So there seems to be more circulation of knowledge related to this specific climate digital interaction, which is something quite important. And on this, particularly in this green and digital component, I think where Europe comes and part of the very strong advancement that we have seen in the last years, also in terms of this innovation capacity, is coming from a very strong policy turnaround. On the one side, the strong commitment to the Paris Agreement, the launch of the Green Deal, the development of the EU taxonomy in terms of climate, and also coordinated approach to guide the financial sector in trying to understand the exposure to climate risk. All of these kind of create a market and launch the opportunity for developing new innovation strategies also in this green and digital interaction. And I think this is quite important. It opens to important new development, and it somehow links to what Mariana was talking before. So try to develop some kind of a mission-oriented strategy where the mission-oriented is a climate and innovation for climate interaction part. It's quite important to link also to the financing side. On that, I can bring something specific of the institution where I work. The bank, the European Investment Bank, has been embracing the climate innovation turnaround. Actually, we have just approved our own rule as the EU Climate Bank with a new climate roadmap, transforming our own activities in order to embrace the climate transformation with very aggressive, very challenging targets in terms of our activities, but also with a radical shift of what we as a public institution can finance in the way to a decarbonization strategies. And with this, I think the key message that I wanted to leave after this point is that coordinated policies are necessary. They are necessary in a moment in which the global challenge, like the COVID vaccine challenge, the fast deployment of the vaccine, or like the innovation challenge related to the climate transition, when we have this kind of challenge, policies will come, policy in terms of support, but these policies need to be coordinated. And with the whole complexity of this coordination, I think more of a dialogue among the different parties is needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah. That was a very interesting real-life perspective, I guess, of the kinds of things that Professor Matsukato was discussing. And at some point, I'll come back to you perhaps with a question about how do you build in mission-oriented aspects into your loan agreements. But I'll come back to you on that if you don't mind. I'd now like to ask Dr. Harshavardhana Singh to share with us the expert work from the E15 initiative he's done on new industrial policies, which we've certainly noted in our World Trade Report. As these new policies are increasingly shifting towards the objective of spurring innovation in the digital field, what is, in your view, the contribution of the world trading system, particularly as a former DDG here at the WTO, in assuring that all countries benefit and that possible negative spillovers from large members can be addressed by the system? Dr. Singh, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank you and the WTO for this opportunity to be a speaker in a fascinating discussion. And I want to greet DDG Xiaojun Yi, Bob Yu, Mark, Ankai, the distinguished speakers on the panel, and others who are participating. I also want to congratulate you on this report. It's very substantive, as usual, on specific issues, both giving knowledge which is going to be useful, plus provoking ideas and thoughts, some of which have been actually shared by the panel discussants themselves. So on digital and innovation, there are certain aspects which we have to be clear due to the digital technologies which are around us and changing in a rapid way. All the conventional ideas have to be relooked at. You know, there's this concept of mature industries. There's nothing like mature industries now. Look at pharmaceuticals. Look at the nature of medicine which is changing. Look at materials. Look, take any established or mature industry. It's not necessarily as we conceptualize it. Second, digital, once we say digital product, a digital industry, there is nothing which is not digital, or mostly everything is digital today. I'm being provocative by saying nothing, because by 2025, the world's smartphone connections will cover 80% of the population. Of course, there'll be a wide range, 50% or less in some countries, and more than 100% in some. The IoT connections, which are about 12 billion now, will double by 2025. So not only will automatic changes take place, which have digital components, you're driving cars which have digital in it. Even those businesses which we say are not digital, a lot of business to consumer and business to business interaction takes place through digital means. And when we think of supply chains, a lot of the parts of that chain actually are digitalized, whether we realize it or not. So the nature of products, the apps, the app economy, the languages which go with it, the applications which go with it, new areas of concern which are coming, SDGs were mentioned. They are new in another way. Innovation is not only in products or in technologies. Innovation is also in institutions and ideas. So how do you connect different dots together in a way that it either works for the common good or does not mitigate the good which is likely to happen, or addresses the negative impact which takes place? So innovation today is not like conventional innovation where you're shifting the frontier or you're moving towards the frontier. You're actually widening the frontier also. So there are various aspects, and given the fact that countries are at different stages of development or capabilities, a system
I'm sorry, Dr. Singh, somehow we've lost your audio here.
perhaps
Yep,
this is
now you're
also
back. Now you're back.
Yeah, I'm back now. Perhaps the point was not pertinent, so IoT stepped in. But the point I'm making is that you mentioned E15 context. One of the things we looked in E15 was this whole span of differences across countries, and how and why is there a need for a common conceptualization of going ahead to maximize or increase as much as possible the benefits and address problems which are going to arise in the next 10 years. So I have two kinds of points. One, that the framework of WTO which exists actually takes into account a lot of the points which have been raised today, but the points raised today are relevant because they give substance and new direction or meaning or content to what is required to be done. What WTO does is that it creates possibility of open markets or exchange within a framework where it allows the openness which it has created to be restricted for specified reasons. That's the reason of tilting the playing field, so to say. But it also recognizes that inherently the rules must tilt the playing field for different members for making a level playing field. So you require the tilting to make it a level playing field, the special and differential treatment, for example, or flexibilities which are there. So the scope of digital is such that it actually it goes beyond jurisdictions. Operators in the digital activities are not necessarily present in the jurisdiction or the geography of the area where the service is provided or where the product is provided. While the regulatory authorities' operations are limited by these jurisdictions. By definition, the regulatory authorities will not be able to regulate digital, which is actually operating elsewhere, and you may not even know where and through how many routes. So you require, by definition, connection and collaboration with regulators elsewhere. Once you do that, you require some kind of commonness to be developed in the framework in which regulator has to work, or the kind of objectives which become relevant. So once we recognize that digital actually is beyond the realm of regulation of a single regulator, the cooperation and collaboration aspect is evident. Then the issue is, how should we do that? How should the more than one regulatory body collaborate through principles, through guidelines? Those are the kind of things which are built in the framework of WTO. You can enrich it, but that framework is there. The other thing is that in this context, I talked about tilting the level playing field, which Professor Matsukato has mentioned, that when you are implementing industrial policy objectives, and now we don't really talk about it as industrial policy, but as new industrial policy, because the purpose of industrial policy in the past, as we saw it, was purely import substitution. Now it is recognizing the depth and width of international trade. Earlier, trade policies were only at the border. Now, inside the border policies are also trade policies. And a lot of these policies actually interact to create the opportunities or the incentives or the directions of activities which have to take place, helped by specific interventions by government in knowledge base, in infrastructure base, in creating skills, in connecting with others, in creating a host of success cases. And this is the microcosm which at the international level, if you increase its scope, increases the externalities. And at the same time, one has to decide what is the framework to ensure that when these objectives are to be met, how should the country do it in such a manner that others are informed, they can discuss their concerns, the country taking the action can actually take cognizance of them and see the extent to which any negative impact could be minimized and positive externalities maximized. And to the extent a different point of view arises between countries, how are these differences to be addressed? That's the way the international trading system, or the WTO, is established. The other thing is, which we have to see, I've indicated several ways in which digital is different, but some of the major elements are that, and some points have already been pointed out, the manner in which scope, scale, and speed of change have changed due to digital. And digital platform allows, it's a platform. You can actually provide more than one product or a multiple host of products together. How will you regulate that? Technology is evolving in a way, any regulation you put in, there will be a possibility of bypassing it. How do you address that? Especially in a framework where the operator is not within your jurisdiction. So the other thing is, technology is increasing so rapidly that knowledge base is not there with the policymaker. And WTO is about policy. It's about objectives, the kind of level playing field or tilting the level playing field factors which were talked about, giving content to them, allowing countries to maximize the possibility of achieving those objectives. But at the same time, when you create the policy framework, you actually have to have knowledge of what is involved. And technologies are evolving so rapidly that the policymakers actually don't have that knowledge. That knowledge is with the private sector. So the involvement of the private sector has to be far larger in this conceptualization. In the same manner as the involvement of those who emphasize social objectives must be there. So the inclusiveness aspect becomes much more. But the regulatory concern of regulatory capture becomes far more palpable. When the entity you are trying to regulate is also part of making your policy, how do you manage that situation? These are some new issues which arise. And the other thing is, competition is going to increase in any case due to digital, because you can't really control the changes which are there. How do you enable that competition in such a way so that your objectives of the national growth or development or international social goals are actually met? And the other aspect which becomes relevant is, because technology control becomes uncertain, technology allows unanticipated or difficult to monitor activities, policymakers become far more sensitive to risk. So it is one thing to focus on SDGs, for example, and create incentives that they are met. Incentives either in the form of carrot or stick, but in a manner that we learn from others also. But the risks of that large unknown, the so-called operational gray area, mean that the policymaker will have an inclination to actually restrict certain activities. How to make sure that this restriction does not cause damage to your objectives? And that requires discussion. It requires a framework of principles. It requires some guidelines. It requires treating different countries in a different way. The evolution of disciplines, which you are going to agree, taking into account all those differences while supporting each other through information exchange, giving both clarity, so transparency, predictability of the operational system, which has been disturbed in a major way, and stability of purpose and operational content. And that's the basic factors, composition of factors which underlies WTO. So international institutional framework has to be developed. And it's such a wide scope of digital that you need to, even institutions need to collaborate. Just as countries need to collaborate, institutions need to collaborate and develop a common vision. So these are some of the kind of aspects which touch upon what you mentioned. And the aspect which then becomes very significant is that there are new concepts. Digital is no longer
Dr.
business as
Singh,
usual.
if I could, before we go into another area, you've raised a number of issues that I would like to bring back to the other panelists, if you don't mind.
Can I just have two
Okay,
short
very
points?
quickly, very quickly.
Yes. One is that with machine-to-machine communication and 3D printing, the rules of the game are changing. Even the WTO system as we know it, rules of origin, possibility of having disciplines across one specific mode of supply will change. The ground will shift under this. The FTA system as we know it today will not have much meaning. So we need to think about that. And new concepts, you have talked about data, privacy, transfer of information, new ways of IPR, taxation under digital regime, different views about that, different forms of payment mechanisms and involvement of consumers, both as beneficiaries and as participants in the regime, and attributing responsibility to fraud, because the point of provision of information or service is not necessarily identifiable or even near the user. So these are new kind of areas which evolve, and you cannot have solutions to it without discussion, collaboration, cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. So I would like to come back to Minister Loh. Given what we just heard from Dr. Singh, how do you allow differentiation, but also aim for commonness and transparency in these discussions? And as I was listening to Professor Matsukato, what I heard from her is that we want to focus on the interaction with the private sector and the government sector and provide a governance framework that accomplishes a mission. So I'd like to hear from you, if possible, how do you integrate these dimensions? How do you, and if you have examples from either Singapore's national strategy or from the e-commerce JSI, we'd love to hear them.
Thank
Minister
you, thank
Loh.
you, thank you, Mr. Kootman, and thank you to my three wonderful fellow panelists. I learned so much from you. And coming back to Robert's question, one keyword is differentiation. The other important word I hear from my three fellow panelists is the importance that government does not develop policy in an ivory tower. And the public policy needs to be designed, especially in this digital era, in partnership with the private sector. Mr. Kootman and my fellow panelists, if I can share with you the journey in Singapore since 3 years ago. Let me just share with you and I think many of you would have been to Singapore. You know, we are a small city-state with only about slightly more than 5 million people. We know since we gained independence that the world does not owe us a living. So we are always thinking about how to future-proof ourselves. So about 4 years ago, our Deputy Prime Minister, Heng Swee Keat, launch what we call the 4.5 billion Sing dollars, and that will be equivalent to about 3 billion US dollars, what we call the Industry Transformation Map, ITM, Industry Transformation Map. So essentially 23 industries were identified and organized in 6 clusters. And if I could quickly share with you, for example, advanced manufacturing, aerospace, electronics, marine offshore, and we have construction, we have the environment services, urban sustainability, air transport, land transport, sea transport, and for lifestyle, we have food services, food manufacturing, organized in 6 clusters, mainly advanced manufacturing, built environment, modern services, lifestyle. Now, why this 23 industry organized in 6 clusters? Because they represent 80% of Singapore's GDP, which means If we do not disrupt ourselves, we will be disrupted and jobs will be lost. So that keeps us awake. So what do? We design the industry transformation map such that the policies and the strategies are not designed by civil servant or government, but for every committee. And I look after the lifestyle cluster. I look after 4 industries: hotel, retail, which are badly hit, food services, food manufacturing. I will have to co-chair the cluster with a head honcho from the private sector. So I have the involvement of private sector. I also have the involvement of what we call the trade association, business association, or sometimes we call them chamber of commerce. And they will be the voice for that particular sector. This is how we make sure, like it or not, we will have to hear the truth and understand the emerging trends, challenges that the sector face. Because like the 3 panelists mentioned, especially in a digital age where change is the only constant, the change of speed is very rapid, and it's important that we keep our eyes and ears close to the ground. Another important stakeholder in this mapping out the industry transformation map, I know in many regimes, when we hear this word, we get a little bit allergic, but in Singapore, it's our secret sauce. We involve what we call the unions. The unions, because they represent the workers. And why do we do that? Because we want to achieve 4 things by involving the private sector, trade association, and the unions. We want to make sure we help the companies in these 23 industries. We help them to boost their innovation capacity. Number 1. Number 2, we want to help them to expand their global footprint. That means to internationalize their operations, knowing that Singapore is a very small market. Any company that start up in Singapore must think global from day one. Number 3, to raise the productivity, especially for domestic sector, so that higher wages can be provided for the workers. We all know if the productivity does not increase, wages cannot rise up and the quality of living cannot improve for the workers. The 4th and the single most important one, by doing all this, is to help Singaporeans and people here to develop future-ready skills so that we can create better jobs for Singaporeans today and tomorrow. This is the first thing I want to share. How do we provide differentiated approach for each of the 23 industry, but at the same time, commonalities, innovation, internationalization, productivity, and also jobs and skills. We will want to disrupt ourselves before we get disrupted by other people. And that's why we want to bring in private sector, trade associations, and the unionists. The other thing I want to quickly touch on, Mr. Koopman, if you allow me, we will also disrupt ourselves before other people do so. And for 20 years, we have what we call the Pro Enterprise Panel, PEP. Last Friday, we just celebrated 20th anniversary. So basically the design, and I oversee the Pro Enterprise Panel. And this is basically a platform where any companies can come to us to lodge a complaint against any government agency for closing the door on them. In the last 20 years, we have received 2,000 suggestions. Out of 2,000 suggestions, 57% of the suggestions were translated into new policies or refined policies and processes. This is what will keep civil servant on our toes. And in order to make this work, the head of the Pro Enterprise Panel is the head of civil service. So I want to pause here to share with you. It's still work in progress. We're always looking out to see how we can continue to future-proof ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Loh. Could I ask Professor Matsukato, given what you've heard on the panel so far, and particularly thinking about the international aspects and what we just heard from Minister Loh, how would you describe cross-country coordination for mission-oriented objectives?
Well, I mean, first of all, some missions by definition are cross-country, like, getting the plastic out of the ocean is not going to happen from any one country alone. But more than on the content, where, again, depending on what one is doing, it will have to, in some cases, be international. It's more about, I think, coming back to that notion of collective intelligence, a word I find myself increasingly using. How do you foster real collective intelligence around areas like vaccine production? That means coming back to that issue of how do you govern innovation, how do you govern production to actually meet public interest kind of tests. And when we think of the public interest, I think it's really important globally, but also nationally, it's just as important nationally, to have better metrics. So we have this word called the public good, and it sounds good because it says good, but actually it's quite narrow. It's basically, we've allowed public goods to be defined in terms of, for example, when you have positive externalities around an area, you will have less private investment in it, like basic research or the production of clean water. And so you'll have underinvestment by the private sector in it. So the public sector has to invest in it. That's a correction for a gap. That's filling the gap of something one actor hasn't done. And I think actually when we're talking about international collaboration, what we actually require is something much bolder. That's not about, market fixing and filling in the gap because someone has underinvested in something, but actually thinking of it in terms of a common good, right? Like what are our common objectives? And that again brings us back to the need for an instrument, something like the mission-oriented framework to do that. But it is also about rethinking the kind of value relationships underneath. I mean, one of the points that I raised in a book I wrote a couple of years ago called The Value of Everything was that we have a problem, when we say govern digital platforms, which again have to be governed globally, otherwise it doesn't really make sense, to distinguish, for example, value creation and value extraction. And this fundamentally comes from the fact that we've confused prices with value. So, if we're only including, say, in GDP, things that have prices, we already know from feminist economists and environmental economists of all the things we're not valuing properly, like care, or we value pollution actually because someone has to go clean it up. So that goes into GDP. But one thing we haven't really admitted, as much as we've talked about, say, the need to add in, say, well-being indicators, is that the distinction between value creation and value extraction actually requires distinguishing rents from profits. And if we think about governing digital platforms for the common good, so that citizens are benefiting, and it's not just about privacy, it's really about all the different ways that we can benefit from algorithms and the power of algorithms, that does require distinguishing how, big tech, the word that is often used, is using algorithms themselves. And if you just look at Google and Amazon, there was so much, again, creation of value in terms of how, say, even small suppliers were more visible on the web because of how the algorithms were working initially. And then the power of the platform, something one of the other speakers raised, ended up then allowing them to use the algorithm for much more kind of nefarious purposes. And in fact, those very small, those smaller suppliers now are not really what is being more visible, but the products that are actually in some ways owned and governed by Amazon and Google themselves. And the marketing and the advertising revenues have, are basically guiding in many ways how the algorithms themselves work. And so that need to, govern markets in order for them to shape our economies to be more inclusive, more sustainable, and to have citizens at the center in terms of these notions of public interest and common good, do require actually asking, how can we then value those activities in such a way that do distinguish value creation from value extraction? And that in the end comes back to how are we valuing the activities themselves in the accounting? And if we're confusing prices with profits, that becomes something that we need to distinguish. And I'm not sure if that was raised so far in our discussion.
Thanks. So I'm still wondering, though, from a global perspective, how can an organization like the WTO or the World Health Organization help develop a more common understanding among members as to what a common goal might be? But let me turn to Deborah, because—
Could I just say one quick thing on that?
Yes,
I mean,
please,
we should remember that the Sustainable Development Goals themselves were chosen by global stakeholders. It wasn't kind of dropped down from the experts inside, say, the UN. There was huge stakeholder engagement that actually came up with those goals. So they are the common goals. The real question is, do we have then the tools on the ground that help us achieve them? And so that's why we need then to rethink how we are, designing industrial strategies, innovation policies, the question you asked, Deborah, in terms of how a public bank can, transform itself in order to itself be more mission oriented. And we just, Deborah knows, I think, published last week a report for the EIB in terms of how its own mechanisms inside, but also its own culture, in some ways needs to change if it's going to be the climate bank and the bank for the circular economy. But the goals themselves, I don't actually think we should start from scratch on that. They are the SDGs, but we need to make them quite concrete, and how they land in a particular area, whether it's a city, a region, a nation, has to also be context specific. It has to mean something to the citizens in order to really catalyze, that cross-actor and cross-sectoral investment that I was talking about before. But we should remember they exist and we have to take them seriously. They were decided on globally 5 years ago, but they need to then guide how we design the instruments on the ground, whether it's a public bank or a procurement policy.
Yeah, in fact, that is one of the challenges I see here in discussions around SDGs in the G20 context, in the WTO context. What's the role of private sector investment? What's the role of trade? But let's turn to Deborah very quickly. Deborah, why don't you tell us a little bit about how EIB is making this this transformation and using its resources to try to affect this kind of change in an innovation environment, both for environment and digital?
Yes, I think, so I take it from two different angles. On the one side, what we are doing on the innovation point of view, and I think on that our discussion has been always on how to accelerate two sides, if you want. On the one side, how to support innovation at the frontiers, but also very much how to accelerate the adoption of innovation and the diffusion of innovations. So we have tried as a public banks to work on the two areas, always trying to address market failures and trying to address issues where there is a value added for our activities, so where we complement existing mechanisms in the market, but always addressing these market failures and where is a value and where there is a value added, and keeping these two parts on trying to support the movement of the innovation frontiers, but also the diffusion of innovation. In the specific case of the transformation of the EU Climate Bank, I think there it's even more radical what we are doing. As an institution, we have been embracing the very strong commitment at the European level of becoming the net zero carbon emission by 2050. And in this way, we have committed to land up to contribute to land in the next decade of 1 trillion to climate action, environmental sustainability. But what is more transformational for us is actually also to be completely Paris Agreement compliant by 2020, actually by the end of the year in all our activities, and then land 50% of our lending activity for climate action, environmental sustainability by 2025. But the real transformational effect, I think, that we see now is this being Paris compliant, because it really changed the kind of thing that we can lend to. So we have to review our energy lending policy, the kind of project that we can finance in industry, buildings, bioeconomy, aviation, road transport, all our rule as a public banks, I think, where there are market failures, but these activities don't comply with the Paris Agreement compliance, and then that means that we phase out for this kind of activities. And one crucial element is also related to pricing. If you wanted to incentivize transformation like this, you have, as economists, we always say you have to take the price right. And here behind everything, there is the estimate of the carbon price that we would use in estimating the economic rate of return of our projects. and the knowledge that this carbon price has to adapt to take into consideration the spillovers effect that it has in terms of incentive. So all of this means a very deep inside the transformation for the institution that we have just started. We are undergoing it, but we have approved the main steps for this change to happen. And I think this tells a lot on what needs to be done when you want to have this transformation effect being more diffuse and the cooperation at the global level, because you have to reflect on the various angles of the public policy activities, how they influence the incentive of the private sector, and try to get all the elements aligned into this transformation. And that's probably something that comes into contributing to the current debate that we have today. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Dr. Singh, one last question for you, and then we're going to turn to some questions that have come in from the audience, if you don't mind. So let's make sure we try to leave some time for this, and I'll try to be short with my question, although my question's a big one. I think what you've heard is, Singapore has a built-in innovation system where the different economic agents come together and discuss how best to take innovation forward and to make sure that the disruption comes from within, but they're also focused on the external market. And you've described, this need for differentiation, and I'm wondering how one takes into account differentiation and this the opportunity for special carve-outs in certain areas in the broader context of these global SDG challenges and countries that really sound like they've got their policy focus on the future and on internal disruption, but also recognize that the global marketplace is critical. So how would you say a developing country or countries wanting special and differential treatment might respond in this environment? Can we square this circle?
Yes, thank you. It has to be work in progress, but one must recognize the underlying principles and what is the overall purpose of achieving a common goal. When an international agreement, it may be hard law, it may be soft law, in the sense there might be the kind of law which, if you are inconsistent with what you have accepted, then there are implications and maybe some kind of disincentives. And there are principles which are guiding principles. You are functioning in a system, and take a look at WTO itself. You are functioning in a system where countries actually have very different capabilities. Their operational context is very, very different. The objectives, however, which are to be met, and Professor Matsukato talked about the SDGs, which are accepted, by the global community. They are common, but people are at different levels of achieving that, or both in terms of the state of operation and achievement of the objective, plus the capability of doing so. The purpose of a common agreement or a common collaborative effort is to create threshold levels, create indicators, create ways of achieving them in a meaningful, practical manner for all concerned, which is where assistance becomes important. Aid for trade in WTO is precisely oriented towards that. Which is where information exchange, experience exchange, and also the rules which are made in such a way that you are actually able to identify. So the conceptual clarity of some of the concepts which have been talked about is very important, because you can have an evaluation process which is very different from what the market is valuing it through prices and profits. The functioning entities actually function in the market. So how do you bring about policies that the gap between where you want to go and what the system, which is the operating system, which is broadly the market, will be closed? That's the incentive or the disincentive system. When you adopt that in the WTO context, where you're looking at trade, are you facilitating? If it's a facilitating thing, you are not restricting anybody. Or are you restricting? In the sense, are you closing the opportunities for somebody else? Because in the national context, countries work based on their national priorities. If it is restrictive, is it a valid objective? If it is required to be restricted, how should it be done? In an informed manner, in a consultative manner? So first, conceptual clarity has to develop. What are the issues in digital, for example, privacy, data transfer? There are different perspectives in the area of digital on the same issue. How do you enable what a country wants to achieve in its best examination of its interest to actually be able to achieve that within the framework which you have created? So if you look at the e-commerce negotiations, for example, you have different kinds of proposals there. Some are stricter proposals, some are best effort. So once you see that, you realize what is the kind of constraints which a country perceives as relevant for itself in a common endeavor. And that's the structure which is required. So it's not to say you cannot do what you want, but when you are doing it and you are in some way affecting the interests of others involved who are actually in this as a common externality. The moment you go into a digital area like environment, you are not limited to a border. So what is the nature of the intervention? For how long? What will be the monitoring methodology? All that is in the framework of the WTO. You just have to bring new concepts. You have to enable countries to work within the existing framework and the new ones which need to be developed. But the common goal has to be, what is a country able to do? What are the gaps? How can those gaps be filled? Can we work together to fill them? Can we support that? If not, can we at least not block it? Those are the framework elements which, as I want to emphasize again, are already part of the thinking process of the WTO. They just need to be reorganized, taking into account the new issues and new concepts which are coming up.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh. Now I would like to turn to Mr. Abwan, who has some questions for the panelists from the floor. I think we have time probably for one of them. So Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bob. I actually have two questions, one which I can answer fairly quickly and one maybe for the panel. There was this question about whether there was a special discussion group in the WTO. I think it was by reference to the United Nations, to discuss market access for trade in creating goods and services. Now, we do not have a particular market access group for creative goods and services, but as I said, there was negotiations in information technology goods, which we consider to be relatively creative. There is a negotiation group on e-commerce, and there was one negotiation on telecom. So in terms of the digital economy, I think in a sense the digital economy was relatively well served in terms of attention given by members, and I agree with some of the views that were shared by Dr. Singh that with digitally enabled processes now coming into the creation of the goods or into the goods themselves, one can say that very many goods are creative. So it is the entire WTO that may be subject to more interest. But I have another question, and some part of which may actually go to the panel. The question is, given that, so let me just get the question right, that we assume that opening competition, opening the market increases competition. However, this may not be the case in digital production. Once basic costs are covered, marginal cost tends to be zero. Hence, opening market may result in increased capital competition. What is the WTO doing to help countries to choose effective competition policies? I just want to cover one area of that question, which is it is not entirely clear that for the entire digital economy, there is a zero marginal cost structure. Actually, depends very much on the segment. We tend to look at the digital economy as a whole. But for example, if you're looking at social network companies, it is true that to expand in another country, creating 1 million more accounts may not lead to very much marginal cost. But it is very different if you're looking at e-commerce, where expansion into a new country involves building of new warehouses or eventually buying new transportation mean to expand and to bring the products into the country or through the country. So we are here with very different cost structures. And it's true that when you look at the revenue to capital ratio, we find 1-to-1 in certain infrastructure based digital companies. When you look at, for example, payment platform, you are generating with $1 of capital many dollars of revenue. So you have a wide heterogeneity here of model. But the question as to what can be done to increase the competition is something that we can lead to the panel. If of course there's no quick answer to that, but here you go.
Well, would any of the panelists like to take on the competition question? We are, by the way, now going beyond our assigned time, and I know many of you have other commitments. But anyway, would somebody be interested in trying to answer that question, or shall we try to follow up with the questionnaire on our own? Okay, Dr. Singh.
Yeah. In the area of competition, what digital technologies have done, and it's not only because costs are low, but even the nature of pricing is very different. Today, you have products provided at free or even negative price in the digital realm. And in competition, the conventional context of unfair pricing or below cost pricing or what is dominant player has changed, because a small player with a source code which can change the whole game in a very quick manner, because speed also is of the results is very different, and the scale at which you can provide the services is very different. The reaction time which you have as a competition authority is very little. How do you also address the situation where within something which is being used is embedded aspect which will create anti-competitive conditions? So once you take into account these new areas, the world of competition policy is coming to terms with these aspects in trying to understand what is involved. And it's like Alice in Wonderland. You have to move faster, run faster and faster to be in the same place. Once you actually understand it, then by definition, you have to work with a common kind of purpose in a collaborative manner, so that you are not working against each other. Even government authorities can create anti-competitive activities with very different actions on their part. So it's like everything else, you have to have information, new issues are arising, you have to then address how that in a manner that it keeps the positive going while minimizing the negative. Countries have changed their digital legislation to take account of that. And meanwhile, large work is going on in developed economies as well as several developing economies. It's work in progress, but the framework is similar to what we talked about. Namely, you need to know more about the new issues. The existing concepts are changing because of these new factors. And when you intervene, you should make sure that you maximize the benefit, which is your objective, and not create additional problems. And that's where collaboration and knowledge sharing, et cetera, becomes important. And this is actually happening. One can go and see some of the changes in the legislation.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. I think we now have to close this session. So I would very much like to thank our panelists for joining us and sharing their insights. I'd also like to thank Mark and Ankai for presenting the report. And thank you to all of the audience for staying with us and listening in. And I look forward to continuing this conversation in the next few months. Thank you all, and have a great evening, morning, or afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you.